everybody at the UN knows Rima Salah. I mean, she's a VIP, and if there's going to be a first female Secretary General, I can see where she would be a perfect choice for that role, because she just is an amazing example of diplomacy, and she is just a wealth of knowledge in so many different areas. And I really feel privileged that we have an opportunity to have her here at today's program. So without further ado, let me welcome our speaker, Dr. Rima Salah.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. It's a great privilege to be with you this afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation, Dr. Ward, and all your colleagues here. It's really a reunion for peace, and you could see it throughout all the speeches today and yesterday. And I hope we will build peace together. Friends and colleagues, since the beginning of the 90s, the number and intensity of armed conflicts have declined. This was, in large measure, achieved through peaceful settlements of conflicts, accompanied by peace support at the local, national, and international level. The United Nations had played a critical role. The United Nations had played a critical role in supporting this positive trend through the peace operation and through the work of its wider political, human rights, and development pillars, and of course through goodwill ambassadors like Reverend Moon, Mr. Nelson Mandela, and others who really brokered peace. Despite this overall spread of peace, the last decade witnessed a rise in violent conflicts. They are also becoming more complex and protracted, involving more non-state groups, regional and international actors. They are more intractable and less conducive to a political resolution. They are more intractable, and also, most importantly, they are becoming threats to global peace and security. Insecurity, like political and criminal violence, civil unrest, have become a primary development challenge of our time. This is requiring more concerted efforts and effective synergy by the international community to prevent and minimize the dangers associated with conflicts and violence and their devastating consequences on our society, eroding all chances of peace, justice, particularly justice, and development. The World Bank 2 years ago and the United Nations report Pathways for Peace, Inclusive Approaches to Preventing Violent Conflict projects that more than half of the people living in poverty will be found in countries affected by high levels of violence by 2030. Today, millions of families find themselves trapped in situations of war and violent conflict that disrupt the fabric of their societies and compromise the very foundations of their institutions. As revealed by a new Save the Children report, more children than ever before, at least 420 million children, are living in conflict zones. 29 million children, or 1 in 5, were born into conflicts in 2018. The impact of violent conflict on families and communities is tremendous and should not be tolerated. In addition to indiscriminate killings and maiming, appalling abuses are perpetrated against them. Their children are trafficked and enrolled as child soldiers and combatants. Women and girls also face the atrocities of sexual violence and exploitation, which include rape, sexual slavery, forced marriage, and trafficking. Sexual exploitation is still used as a tactic of war and terrorism, destroying families and communities, attacking their dignity and their humanity. When their homes and communities are no more safe havens, and when their streets become battlefields, and their schools used for military purposes, families flee for their lives, in search of safety in their neighborhood country or thousands of miles away from their homeland. This is a time of unprecedented displacement of more than 70 million people, primarily women and children. An estimated 50 million children, according to UNICEF, have migrated across borders or have been forcibly displaced. And 28 million children have been uprooted by horrific violence. The danger they encounter during their harrowing journey includes exploitation and violence, abduction and detention, how many children we see that are behind bars. And also they're exposed to xenophobia and discrimination. The plight of families and children whose lives have been shattered by violent conflict continues to haunt us all. Images of families and children fleeing their homes, communities and villages continue to haunt us. Their perilous journey continues to haunt us. But what should haunt us more is the full extent of people's pain and loss, as well as the resilience and moral courage which is not captured and is underreported or recorded. Rarely are families asked how their own conflicts have affected them and violence affected them, or what would make their lives better, and how could we change the tide of violence towards a path to peace, to reconciliation and dialogue. It is in this context of devastation and complexity that the United Nations continues its journey to further advance the ideals of we the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and nations large and small. Further, they say, and to unite our strength and to maintain international peace and security. Nevertheless, the United Nations continues its journey to further advance its ideals and fulfill its goals in a new era. We talked about the new era the last 2 days. An era of building a world of peace, in an era of where people are the center of peace and development, in an era of dialogue and reconciliation, in an era of protection of civilians, and in an era of sustaining peace. Most importantly, in an era of inclusion and partnership with all members of society, including women, youth, and children in the service of peace, who also expressed in my many trips and in my work with the United Nations, I met those women and men and children, and they expressed themselves saying that they want to be heard, not only as victims of violence, conflicts, and displacement, but as agents of change and drivers of peace. In laying the foundation of an environment conducive to peace and sustaining peace, the UN General Assembly adopted in 1997 the groundbreaking Resolution 5215, proclaiming the year 2000 as the International Year of the Culture of Peace. In its resolution, adopted on the 10th of November 1998, it proclaimed the period 2001-2010 as the International Decade for a Culture of Peace and Nonviolence for the Children of the World. On the 13th of December 1999, the General Assembly adopted a declaration and program of action on the culture of peace and global citizenship, which today Mr. Ban Ki-moon talked a lot about global citizenship. Subsequent resolution adopted every year had reaffirmed the commitment of the United Nations to build and promote the culture of peace. On the occasion of the observance of the 20th anniversary of the culture of peace and the United Nations High-Level Forum that was held just in September, the General Assembly adopted another resolution and titled Follow-up to the Declaration and Program of Action on a Culture of Peace that further reconfirmed the commitment of the United Nations. And when I say the United Nations, all of us, we the people, to follow up the declaration and program of action on a culture of peace. Without a culture of peace, we cannot build peace. The vision of the culture of peace was further captured by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustaining Peace Resolution. In the historic and memorable meeting of the General Assembly in 2015, all members adopted the Transformative 2030 Agenda, and all leaders of governments signed on this, and they should be accountable to that. The agenda, which is universal, is integrated and indivisible, in nature recognized for the first time the direct link between peace, justice, and development. Its 17 goals, as you know them, maybe range from ending poverty in all its forms everywhere, to ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education, to reducing inequality within and among countries, to achieving gender equality, to taking action to combat climate change, and also to promoting peaceful and inclusive societies as articulated in Goal 16, which I consider is in the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals. The agenda calls for peaceful, just, and inclusive societies that provide equal access to justice and that are based on respect for human rights, on effective rule of law and good governance at all levels, and on transparent, effective, and accountable institutions. In signing the 2030 Transformative Agenda, the world leaders, including the Pope, who was also attending, Pope Francis, expressed their determination to foster peaceful, just, and inclusive societies that are free from fear, I repeat it because I was in countries and I was in places where people are fearful of what is happening in the future. Fear from fear and violence, and for not leaving anyone behind. The groundbreaking Sustaining Peace resolutions also came later. They also emphasized the importance of a comprehensive approach to sustaining peace, particularly through the prevention of conflict and addressing the root causes. Until now, we did not really address the root causes of conflict. They also promote sustained and sustainable economic growth, poverty eradication, social development, national reconciliation, and including through inclusive dialogue and mediation. Most importantly, the resolution confirmed the vital role of women, youth, families, and communities in preventing conflict, in peacemaking, peace building, and sustaining peace. It's good to have peace, but how do we sustain peace? The importance of the participation of all stakeholders in the service of peace was affirmed in the Plan of Action to Prevent Violent Extremism that was launched by Mr. Ban Ki-moon in 2015. It calls for the engagement of communities and families, including women and girls and young people, to prevent violent extremism. I know that many mothers used to tell their children, come back home, I can take care of you. I don't want you to be a terrorist or to undergo violent extremism. And mothers played a very important role. The importance of the participation of all stakeholders in the service of peace was also affirmed in the Plan of Action, yes, to prevent violent extremism, but also 20 years ago, the Security Council adopted the Resolution 1325, which we are celebrating now. This is the landmark resolution that affirmed the role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflict. Women should have a place at the table. So in peace negotiations, in peace building, and in peacekeeping. It urged all actors also to increase the participation of women and, most importantly, to incorporate gender perspective in all United Nations peace and security efforts. There was also another resolution 5 years ago, which is an important, it's youth, peace and security, which is Resolution 2250, which was presented, and I'm proud to say, by my country, Jordan, that reinforced the power of young women and young men in shaping peace and security in the world. It urges the international community and governments to support the youth efforts and integrate them in decision-making at all levels, carrying out intergenerational dialogue. It further highlights the important role of education, skill development, and employment facilities in the struggle against poverty, most importantly, social and political marginalization and exclusion. These are the driving factors for war and extremism. To crystallize this new vision and action for preventing conflict, building and sustaining peace, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres introduced a set of mutually reinforcing reforms to ensure that were started by also Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And this is to ensure that the UN is more fit for purpose. And that's why he called on us on a high-level panel to see how can the UN be more fit for purpose and how can we really face conflicts in a better way. So the UN is more fit for purpose, and they called, and Mr. Guterres called on all agencies. We have many agencies at the United Nations, UNICEF, UNDP, ILO, but he called on all agencies to work effectively together to achieve the development of peace agenda. In his January 2018 report on peace building and sustaining peace, Guterres said, "The scale and nature of the challenges of sustaining peace calls for closer strategic and operational partnership among the United Nations, national government, and other key stakeholders, including international, regional, and sub-regional organizations, international institutions, civil society particularly, and the private sector, and academia." Mr. Ban Ki-moon talked a lot about academia, the role of academia, the role of universities in building peace. Hence, I think it's time now to shape innovative, transformative, and participatory approaches to address both policies and global action to prevent conflict, reduce violence, build and sustain peace. In the last 2 years, the UN agencies, the World Group, and other research and policy organizations included pathfinders for peaceful and just and inclusive societies, which the Secretariat of the Pathfinders is at NYU in the university in New York. And they presented the world an integrated approach towards peace that calls on all institutions to work together in the path of preventing violent conflict. This call does not only emphasize that peace-building strategy should include the policy, regional, national, and local level, but most importantly, it should ensure local participation and ownership of peace-building design and practice. So now a growing body of evidence shows that participation of communities, women, youth, and children in all aspects of peacemaking, peace building, and sustaining peace has a tangible impact on human security and on peace and security in general. They play an important role in sustaining peace by anchoring peace dividends in their communities. I was in peacekeeping missions, and I know that we thought that we'll bring peace by signing peace plans with warring parties, but this is not enough. So women, for example, are vocal advocates for preventing conflict before it breaks. We know that in numerous countries, women are at the forefront of campaigns to diffuse tension between different groups. Women frequently bridge political, economic, and social divides. As they are able to build a broad coalition for peace, they also take part in national and local reconciliation. So, as such, investing in the positive development also of young children as a path to creating a culture of peace and sustaining peace at home in the community. There is a new and well-established body of scientific evidence from multiple disciplines, from neuroscience, psychology, and economics, that continues to substantiate the link between the early years of life and early life environment with long-term well-being. violence prevention, and behaviors linked with more peaceful communities. The formative years of life and intra and inter-family and community relationships are powerful agents of change that can promote resilience, social cohesion, and peace. So we are advocating at the United Nations that investing in the early years of life should be part also and be put on the agenda of peace building. In this regard, what do we need? We need the commitment of the international community to translate promises, resolutions, and plans of action into reality for a more peaceful, just, and secure world. It's not enough to have all these resolutions. How do we make them a reality for the people? We need, very important, responsive, compassionate, and accountable world and national leaders. As my king, His Majesty King Abdullah of Jordan, in addressing the European Parliament just 2 weeks ago, and in stressing the importance of leadership, said that leaders have a responsibility to safeguard their people's long interest and welfare. We need to place the interest of people in the heart of our development and peace building and sustaining peace effort. This means we have to reach everyone. We must empower women and girls, men and boys, and help them rebuild their lives, fulfill their human rights, and most importantly, restore their dignity. I know I was born a refugee, and I know how refugees lose their dignity. We need international and national actors to rethink strategies and programs to make them people-centered, where local communities can play an important role in decision-making. We also need responsible actors to build programs that are long-term and inclusive. They should all go beyond physical security towards human security, which we're going to discuss later, peace and justice. They should include access to social services, such as healthcare, education, economic empowerment. Most importantly, they should include reconciliation and mediation mechanism, creating vital spaces for people to voice their grievances and manage conflict through non-violent means. You know that the ingredients of war and conflict is inequality and marginalization of people. How can we listen to people better, and how can leaders, our leaders in the world, they're accountable and they should listen to their people. So, ladies and gentlemen, the task ahead of us to build and sustain peace is formidable, but looking at all of you, we are optimistic. And as Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General, used to say, it is our shared responsibility, you and me and every one of us. And there is no better time, I think, than now to unite our strength, to change the tide of violence and build a peaceful world for all of us and the generations to come. As we are celebrating the 100th year of Reverend Dr. Moon, and also the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, let's do it now. Let's take our seat at the table at all levels, from the village, the community, to the nation, to the international, to the regional, and to the international. We have to have a seat at the table. Thank you very much.